Mother eagle, stir thy nest. Route thine eaglets to the breezes. They enjoy the test. Good afternoon again. And welcome to this 150th celebration of Tougaloo's founding. And we have a treat for us today. Our presenter for the afternoon is the wonderful Professor Sharon Streeter. Of course, last night we had the opportunity to celebrate her because she has been at this institution for 31 years. And let's give her a round of applause for that. She's the chair of the Computer Science Department in Mathematics, but she's also a graduate of this historic institution, and she has a passion for Tougaloo that is unparalleled. And I introduce her as she talks about the Bodie Plantation. Even though she's a computer scientist, she's also a historian at heart. And I absolutely adore her for that. But if you all would, welcome to the podium, Professor Sharon Streeter.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bodie Plantation. I am Professor Sharon Streeter. As was mentioned, I'm chair of the Mathematics and Computer Science Department, associate professor of computer science, and also director of the Bodie Plantation Project. So I want to welcome you all today to come and learn about the Bodie Plantation and those that were enslaved here 150 years ago. So how did I, a computer scientist, get in a historical project? I am not a historian. So when I was a student here, I would pass the mansion every day going to classes. Also, when I was a student, the mansion housed the business office. And so I spent many hours in data processing with Curtis Shaw, listening to the ghost stories about the woman in white. And so a few years fast forward, I'm living on the campus. So I actually did live on this campus, and I still had those questions about the slaves. Where are they? Where are they buried? And even further, I started this project. The original grant was written by Candace Love Jackson. It was a digital humanities grant. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to marry GIS with my interest and love for Tougaloo College. And so the original idea was to just map the campus, finding any kind of documents I could, maps or any kind of clues as to what the plantation looked like back in those days, 1850s and 1860s. But the project has expanded from that point. And so we're going to I have a lot of information for you, so we're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about the research goals, our wonderful students who've been working with me, the Bodie family, what we've learned about the actual Bodie family, the plantation, current research, and future plans. So those of you who were here last year, I promised you some information, and I'm making good on my promise. I have that information for you. So first, the goals of the research is not only to map the plantation, but to discover artifacts. We want to know where the slave quarters were. I believe the bodies are still here and that they're waiting to be found. We also have a period where we don't have a lot of information, the transition from the plantation into the college. And so we're trying to build that information. And of course, to educate the community. The ultimate goal is to educate. So this is my mission statement. The Bodie Plantation, to seek, save, and inspire. Again, to seek those that were enslaved here, any artifacts we can find, to save and preserve that, and to inspire future generations. And these are some of the additional goals. I want to thank Tony Bounds and also Professor Mayberry. They kind of worked with me, and over the year, we have come up with these goals. We do want to include, in addition to the academic research, visual and performance interpretation that illuminates the plantation life. And of course, social awareness, making connections between historical slavery and present-day slavery. So, my wonderful students, These 4 students have gone on to industry and graduate school. They started out with me with this research in 2015. And these are my current students. So if you are here, my current research students, would you please stand? So let's get into the Bodie family. So we can trace the Bodie family back to 1545 in Essex, England. Okay? Captain Bodie was the captain of this ship, the Mary Rose, and he served with under King Henry VIII. This ship is pretty famous, and if you want to learn more about it, you can go to the website. And so they have a whole website just about this ship. So how did the Bodie family come to America? So about 100 years later, we see another William Bodie coming to America, to Isle of Wight County, Virginia. He had over 8,000 acres of land through purchases and land grants. But the interesting thing to note is that he was a Quaker and he didn't own any slaves. So the family business came along a lot later. Okay? He had 3 wives, 1 in England and 2 in America. And then about 3 generations later, we see the Bodies moving to North Carolina. And they moved there because of the superior tobacco land. So now we're going to get closer to the owner of the plantation, who was John Williams Bodie. Those of you who know your Tougaloo history, John Williams Bodie was the owner of this plantation. So here we actually see portraits of his parents. So this is George Bodie, and that is Lucy Williams Bodie. They are the parents of John Williams Bodie. He was in the House of Commons in Nash County, and she bore him 7 children. She was the second wife. George Bodie had about 11 children. Okay? And so we see them living to pretty good ages. Okay? And Rose Hill Estate, you can go visit that estate. It's still in North Carolina. They use it more for an entertainment venue, okay? But the Rose Hill Estate is still there. Now, John Williams Bodie. And you guys can stop and ask questions if you want, if you have a burning question. So, let's learn a little bit about John Williams Bodie. So, this is his picture. According to Ancestry.com, this is John Williams Bodie, the owner of the Bodie plantation. He was born in North Carolina. His occupation was slave owner, and he was unmarried, and we see here, according to the record, he had no children. A bachelor on a plantation with slaves, no children? I think not. So we're going to see some information that will also illuminate that point. And again, those of you who know your Tougaloo history, he built the mansion for his betrothed, and she decided not to marry him. So there are stories that she came to the plantation one day. I think this information came from Mississippi, The View from Tougaloo. That she came to the plantation one day and she saw him mistreating the slaves, and she decided not to marry him. That's one account. We also have another account that, according to that time, she believed he had about 300 slaves, and she wanted to marry someone with 500 slaves. So that's another story that has been going about. But again, a lot of this information is in the archives and in the View from Tougaloo. According to history, he never lived in the mansion. Again, there's other information that disputes that. You see this number 16. We mentioned that George Bodie had 11 children, but he also adopted some of the children of his brothers who had passed. So that's why he had 16 brothers and sisters. Now, it is claimed that he is buried in Greenwood Cemetery. We have not been able to find the grave site. Okay? Let's see. Now, this is some information we found. An obituary that was published in North Carolina says that he died of typhoid fever. Okay? Now, he did die on the plantation. And it's interesting to note that this obituary says he was one of the most skillful, scientific, and successful farmers in the South. He was kind to his slaves and careful of their comforts. Really? Okay. So we find that he also, it does say that he was a bachelor, but we will also find some information in the presentation that disputes this successful farmer information as well. Okay? Now, we don't have a whole lot of information about John Williams Bodie. He was a bachelor. We don't have a lot of letters that he wrote. I was able to find some letters that the sisters wrote to each other that mention him. I haven't processed all of that information, so he is mentioned in some of those letters, but we have no writings from him at this point. Okay? I was fortunate enough to receive an article on John Williams Bodie from the newspaper. I want to thank Whitney Romaine from Mississippi Department of Archives and History for sending that to me. And so I am going to show you a little video that I made to dramatize this story. Okay? So this happened actually on the Bodie plantation, May 31st, 1859. So we know a little bit about him from that story. I thought it was very interesting, and that is definitely going in the book. So we do have some information about ancestors or descendants of John Bodie that are still currently living in the area. And we see a picture of Miss Claudia Duncan. Again, want to thank Doris Bridgman for this information, and she has been in the chapel. So she is the great-great-grandniece. I don't know if we have enough greats there, but she is a descendant of John Williams Bodie. So the plantation. So here we also have some new information for you. How many of you remember, pop quiz, who remembers how many acres were in the original plantation? Dr. Prater? 2,000 acres. So over 2,000 acres on the original plantation. And so of course, we've gone over some of this information. He was over $20,000 in debt, okay, when he passed, and the plantation, of course, was sold to pay the debts. And again, from Mississippi, the View from Tougaloo, we get the information about how Tougaloo was founded in terms of the purchase of the land, which became present-day Tougaloo College. Now, this is the Robert O. Wilder building, again, built with slave labor. It's once served as the residence for the college's first president, classrooms and dormitories. And as I mentioned earlier, it was the business office, data processing. On the second floor was the president's office and the vice president's office during that time. Now, we are going into another phase of the renovation of the mansion. And if you go by and you look in the windows, you can see that everything has been stripped out of the mansion. And you can see the bones, basically. And it's very, very interesting because you can see the hand-hewn beams inside, okay? And we'll never see that again, okay? And so I'm hoping to do a documentary, okay? So we're gonna get in, we'll be working with Bruce O'Hare and Carlos Sanders to go in and videotape and get stills of everything inside before they start the next phase of the renovation. Another interesting thing on the inside, if you haven't been in there, all the way on the third floor in the cupola, there's some wallpaper on the ceiling that mimics the night sky. It's blue with white stars. It's faded, but I talked with Kelly Monaghan yesterday, and when they do the renovation, they're going to restore that wallpaper so that it mimics the night sky like it did before. We will be making sure that we preserve the old wallpaper, okay, before the renovation is complete. Now, mapping the plantation. So, this diagram I showed you last year, and if you look, this came from the will. This is County Line Road. So this information is in section, township, range information. And I have learned more about section, townships, and ranges than I ever wanted to know in order to be able to map this. But we said last year, this time, we would have that map overlaid so you can actually see how far, the extent of the plantation, and we have done that, okay? So we see we have a total of 1,280 acres in Madison County and 780 in Hinds County. So everything above this line is Madison County, everything below this line is Madison County. Hinds County, Madison up top. All right, so where do we start? So what you're looking at is a grid of the sections, townships, and ranges. And those little dots represent the middle of those sections. So I had to use this grid first in order to be able to map the information onto the grid. Now, this is what we wanted. This is the Madison County information. I put the little pins there so you can see the sections. This yellow piece is the campus proper. It's basically from the baseball diamond to the gate. So that it gives you some perspective. This is not the whole of the Tougaloo property. It's just therefore so you can see kind of where the land was. And of course, this is the Hinds County side. So I'm going to zoom in. This is not a live document, so I just have screenshots. But it'll give you some perspective as to the extent of the plantation. All right, I've added some streets. Okay, so let's look a little bit at where we are. Okay, so this is Atkins. This is County Line Road. This is Highland Colony. So we see portions of Highland Colony were in those original Bodie lands. We see this is 55. Okay, and this is 220. Now, one of the first things I wanted to do was to see whether, because I'm from the Tougaloo community, and I wanted to see where the place that I grew up, whether it was a part of the Bodie lands. Okay, so the first bubble I put on here is my mom's house, 222 Vine Street. Looks pretty close, doesn't it? Okay, let's zoom in. All right. here we are. Also, you are familiar with these streets. So we see Delmar, Hillcrest, College Street. Those of you familiar with the Tougaloo community, those were on Bodie lands. We see Grant Street. We see Brown Street. Didn't quite make it to Rand, okay? And we see over here Floral Drive. Those of you familiar, this is Hanging Moss. So Hanging Moss was within that line, okay? Let's zoom in one more time. Now, yes. So now I have another connection to the Bodie Plantation. My childhood home right here at 222 Vine Street, and my sister is in the audience, we lived on the Bodie Plantation. All right, so you can clearly see it now. It's within the range. Wow. We're going to look a little more closely at the, again, the Hinds County side. We see North Colony, Woodhaven. Okay, some of you familiar with these streets. Okay, North State Street here, portion of that. And let's move on. Now, I zoomed in at the end of Vine Street. This is the Tougaloo Community Center. So it was on former Bodie lands. This is the Wynn Job Center. This is Gray Daniel Chevrolet. Look at all of that, all those cars out there were on Bodie land. Okay, and this is the hospital, the specialty hospital. You guys can ask questions if you want. Also, it's interesting, this is the Madison County side. I have to let my good friend Charlene Cole and my classmate Sam Cole know that the Cole Road and that Cole Lane, if you know those, a lot of us know the Coles. Okay, let them know that that property was on former Bodie lands. So I don't know if they knew that or not. Yeah? So again, we can see some more detail. We don't have time to do a full analysis, but this one I want to stop here. This is Walmart, and that's North Park Mall. Okay? One of the questions we had last year was about a slave graveyard. We had received information, I think from Dr. McGinnis, that at this church, Christ-like Church of the Highlands, there was a potential slave graveyard. And at the time, we didn't know the extent of the plantation as to whether that could have been the Bodie slaves. Okay, so we can clearly see that it was not within the range of the original plantation, not to mean that it couldn't have a connection to the slaves here on this plantation, but we can at least make that a lower priority at this point in terms of looking at that potential site. Okay, but we'll keep it on the list. Yes? Question?
What did you say the church name was?
Christ-like Church of the Highlands. I think that's what the name is. Yeah. Christ-like. Okay. If you're going toward Renaissance, it looks like a big square box. Okay, brown. Okay. Now, finding the slaves. So, we have information about the slaves in 1839, the enslaved, okay. I know I'm saying slaved, but the enslaved. Don't send me emails and, you know. But 1850, okay, and 1860. And then we'll go back and talk about 1839. So, slave schedules. Okay, before I started doing this research, I had no idea what a slave schedule was. And so a slave schedule is basically like a census for the slaves. Okay, one of our students, why is the census important? Yes, sir.
Basically the number of people in the household.
Yes.
And,
Yes, for funding. Okay, excellent. So, and what? Representation. okay? So the census was important, okay? Why was the census of the slaves important? Slaves were considered property? Yes, Dr. Freeman.
They were property, but they were also counted for representation in voting and how, in terms of Congress and getting votes counted in the Congress. Three-fifths compromise.
Yes,
They counted three-fifths of slaves because they were not a whole vote.
yes. So the next slide. Thank you, Dr. Freeman. The three-fifths compromise. So the southern states wanted more power, okay? So they wanted to count the slaves, but the northern states were arguing that they were property and they shouldn't be counted because they were going to lose power, okay? So they came up with this three-fifths compromise, and also the slave schedules were put in place to document the slaves. There were slave schedules in 1850 and 1860, okay? And so we have the information from the Bodie plantation. Let's look at that. This is the 1850 slave schedule, okay? Those of you who were here last year, you saw this information. What do we see? What's interesting here? No names, okay? So we don't have any names. Also, we have what? So what is a mulatto? Okay, mixed, okay? So we have two mulattoes. Look at the numbers of males and females. So we had more males and more females, but what is the total here? 22. That doesn't seem like a whole lot of slaves, 22, okay? Especially for the size. Now, all of the 2,000 acres may not have been cultivated, okay, but it still seems like a small number, okay? The average age was about 25, okay? Let's look at the next schedule, okay? Now we see in 1860, we have a lot more slaves, okay? 63 blacks, 1 mulatto, okay? Look at these ages, 1 month, 2 months, 9 months. So we have more what? More females, okay? So they may have been focusing more on what? Reproduction at that point, okay? Average age about 23, okay? If we go back to this one, we'll notice that they had 2 slaves that were 60 years old, a male and a female. When we move forward to 1860, okay, I think one, okay? Over here on the males, 70. Right. So that one, the female didn't seem to have survived or was no longer there. But that male is still there. That was 60 years old previous. Okay? Any questions, any comments?
And still at the time there were no names.
No names. Yes, ma'am.
So did the slaves all take the name of the master plantation?
Not always. And we don't have any documentation in terms of these. And so we're looking, you know, for them. And it's very difficult with no names. Okay. But I'm not a historian, but in some cases they did, but in a lot of cases they didn't.
Now, the landowners often kept journals.
Yes, landowners kept journals. Some landowners were better at others than that, and we have not found anything from John Williams Bodie. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Spear, have we yet compared this finding with, cross-referencing it with census documents from that particular time period? Because some of them do have written letters.
Right. I have looked in the National Archives at I actually started looking, 10 years past, 20 years past out to find, to see if we could find any of these slaves.
And I guess that's my question. Were the slaves right? You know there are slave narratives, so I'm
Right.
curious. Are there any letters,
We haven't found any yet, because we don't know who they are at this point. Yes, Jonathan?
Are there records of like transfers or like loans that come by?
We will be looking into financial information. Also, insurance information is good to find out information about what was going on with the slaves. So we're working as fast as we can, but those things, and we appreciate those things are on the list. Okay, the banks, you know, merchants and farmers, right? Merchants and farmers. Okay, so may possibly getting those records. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I was wondering if you have when did the slaves began to be put on the census? Was it 1840?
Some masters did, some didn't. So it was according to that particular master whether they wanted to document their slaves in 1840. And we do have some documented on the regular census in 1840, but there were only 2 slave schedules, 1850 and 1860. Yes, ma'am, Dr. Parker Smith.
During the renovations,
Mm-hmm.
there must have been some findings, in that process.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where any of them might be, or what they were?
I talked with Mr. Monaghan. I know we found some tools that were left inside of the walls. Okay, that has been taken to Mr. Bounds, so he has those artifacts. In terms of what's inside, they have stored everything that came out. Now, before the renovation, I don't know if the archives has any artifacts that came out of the mansion. There was one picture that was found by someone, it was around the 70s, that we have in the archives. It was in the ground, though, and they found that. So Tony had to leave. He was here a few minutes ago, but he has some artifacts from the plantation days. Yes, ma'am.
Will they be opening the archives during this week for us to go and see, or either allow us to look?
Yes, the archives is open. Okay?
Do you have, I've been doing research on the Swan family, and I'm wondering if sometimes you can find information in wills. I was wondering if
Yes.
any wills
Yes,
that
we,
you looked at to see.
right. We do have Bodie's will, and we do have the mention of 3 slaves in that will, and we're getting ready to get to that information on the next slide. Yes, sir.
Have you done any archaeological?
Okay, that we are working with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. They have been to the campus, and I have some slides showing what we've done up to this point. So that is in the plan to do an actual archaeological dig here. The Latter-day Saints, yeah. Yeah, we've looked at the Latter-day Saints site to get whatever information we could, but again, it's really difficult because we have no names for these. Okay, let me move on so we can get to this information was interesting. I went back and looked at the slave schedule. This is the actual document from the slave schedule, and you see that it also lists some columns. One is number of manumitted, deaf, dumb, blind, insane, or idiotic. Again, their words, not mine. Don't send me email. Okay. And this one, the number of slave houses. So when we originally got the information, Carolyn, as you said, the students went out and found the information on Ancestry.com and the Latter-day Saints site, but that has been sanitized. Okay, so I went back and looked at the actual document and was able to glean 3 more pieces of information. So we see that there was 1 person listed, age 21, that was listed as an idiot. Okay, this is big information. This is really, really big. We now know that there were 12 slave houses on this plantation. Okay. And so this is going to help us, sir, when we start doing the archaeology, when we start looking for where the slave houses were, we know that there were 12, okay? And manumitted, didn't know what this word meant until I looked it up, slaves that were freed, okay, which is 0, okay? Now, we've done our comparison here. This is the Bodie will, okay? So, yes, ma'am.
I do have some questions. Back to the
Not yet. We're still searching for some clues, okay? But there's lots of technology that will help us with that, LiDAR, radar, ground penetrating radar. When I talk with the chief archaeologist at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, he's on board with the project, and we will have access to the equipment that we need when we start searching. Yes.
There also may be some corporate partners like Google and Microsoft and others who have a very vested interest in AI, artificial intelligence, to help us map out and find them.
Okay, another pop quiz. Anybody remembers the names? I think I heard it. Ceci was one. Anybody else remember the names? So he had 2 men servants that were Jonas, Corey, and what do you think her role was? The master's woman. And her name was Ceci. Okay? So I did spend some time trying to look for these 3 this summer, going through the census records. I have not been able to find them in the right time frame or with the names of it. I actually could not find Ceci at all, that name. But again, of course, they could have changed their names. Okay, so but we haven't given up. We will continue to look. Okay. This is what he left for the slaves. $10 each every year as long as they may live, and recommend their good treatment. Notice what he didn't do? He didn't free them. Is there a question? Just kind of. And $10. So this is a piece of information that we can really work with now. Tony Bounds and I went to the Madison County Chancery Court, and we found a promissory note that mentions between John Bodie and another party, and it has the names and ages of every slave. So now we have somewhere we can really start looking for these, because we have names and we have ages. And that's going to help us tremendously as we try to find it. But we believe that this was the beginning of the plantation. Okay, we don't know anything about them, just that they were mentioned in the will. We're trying to find information about them. So I would really love to know more about her myself. Okay. It included this. It was a long list of things, tools and things he was buying, because he was basically stocking the plantation at that point. Okay, so this is where I'm going to get some of my students to start working and start trying to find these, because that's going to help us. The information 1850 and 1860, we don't have any names. So, but we see that in 1839 there were 44, okay, enslaved. Okay. And the average age was 16. So in the transition to the college, we discovered this map. Tony discovered it, 1884. This is actually the railroad track. It's very difficult to see. It's very delicate condition. One of the interesting things that we're going to start working on this one is outside of the gate, there are little blocks there, and their names, and we believe that those are family names who lived in those houses right outside the gate. Okay, so we're going to start researching that as well in terms of the community information. Okay. So, yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. Right. Right, good point, good point. So how do we do this research? So we had to build a foundation to create a digital map, and again, my students were working on these projects, and so we created this digital map. So on the back of your handout, you will see that there's a QR code, and if you scan that, it will take you to this digital map, okay? You can use this digital map to find your way around campus if you needed to, but it will serve as the foundation for our other maps. As we digitize the other maps, we will overlay them on this map. And I'm going to move a little bit further. You can look at that later. We also have pictures. So every time you click on a building on the map, there's a picture of that building. One of the interesting things that we did after this was to overlay this map. This is a 1916 map of Tougaloo College. It's a paper map. There are buildings here that don't exist anymore. So what we were able to do is to geo-reference this map, okay, on top of an actual map with the longitude and latitude so that we could see where the building footprints used to be. Okay, so this is going to be an important part of the research as well. If you look at these little wireframes here, those are buildings, okay? Also over here, we can see buildings that no longer exist. The wood shop, the iron shop. I think the wood shop, I think I'll be able to see it on the next one. Stribby Hall, the barns, okay? We are not finished with this. This one has not been published, so we're still working on this. This is like a historical overlay, okay, of buildings that no longer exist, okay? So again, if you click on the mansion, it gives you a picture, it gives you a description. We have not put this online, so you can't access that layer yet. Current collaborations, and then our time will almost be up. I'm currently working with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, University of Mississippi, Brown, and Vanderbilt. Projects. This is a project that is an outgrowth of the Bodie project. I think, Dr. Prater, we talked about the County Line Road work and how it's encroaching upon the wildlife. Dr. Hurst, who's back there, and I are working on mapping the wildlife. Okay. So we've got deer, wild turkey, we've got all kinds of things out there. The land is teeming with wildlife. And so these are actual pictures of Tougaloo deer. Okay, so Dr. Hurst put cameras out. You have what, over 300 pictures of the deer, of the Tougaloo deer, okay? We will be expanding this project. We received a $10,000 grant. Students will be getting out next month, putting out more cameras. Okay, we will be analyzing the behavior. This is what's happening, okay? The deer are being killed trying to cross County Line Road. They're getting stuck in the fences, okay? So we will be studying their habitats, okay? We'll also be comparing rural deer to urban deer. So we have urban deer. We have a site that's going to be 50 miles out, and we're going to compare. And we already have data that shows that the urban deer behave differently from the rural deer. And so this will be an ongoing project. We're also looking at social networking. Deer are very social animals, and we're actually using social media software to network the deer. And it actually works. We have data. If you're interested, there's going to be a poster presentation on Friday. Is Justin here? He's going to present this data that we have at this point about the deer, okay? So we'll have a website and everything, and it makes it more relevant to the students, okay? Just like you have a Facebook page, we'll be able to map, this is how they mark that they've been to the page, okay? This is how they update their status, okay? Plantation Escape, okay? One of my students is actually doing a game, okay? It's a creative interpretation of the lives of the slaves in their efforts to escape. Sam, raise your hand. Okay, he is working on the game. Okay, hopefully we'll have it finished. Okay, again, this is educational, okay, for the students that will be playing it. Okay, I'm going to quickly move on. One of the big projects we're doing is the graveyard project. So again, this is the extension of the digital map overlaying the information. So we will be mapping the entire graveyard. We have already started on that. We worked on it in spring. I have classes in spring 2018, 2019. Jemiah, did Jemiah come in? She's back there. She's the lead on this project. And so we will have it digitized, web-based. You'll be able to click on a headstone. You will be able to see some information about that person. And this documents the community. It's more than just Tougaloo, the campus. Okay? So we will be working on that. Yes. Tony could tell you the date right off the top of my head, off the top of his head, but I can't remember. I think it's 1832. I think it's 1832. Okay, and it actually happens to be one of the faculty members, okay, from Tougaloo. She went to the original president, the first president, and asked for a place for a graveyard. And it's ironic, guess who was the first person buried there? Her. She was the first person buried in the graveyard. So we're going to have a lot more information. Yes, 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 Dr. Parker Smith.
Have you read some of the letters of the early presidents?
Yes, yes, yeah. Right. Yes. We have quite a few letters, and we're going to digitize that. We're going to create a digital archive of that information. I hope to have the graveyard documentary. I'm actually doing a film. You know, I've got the bug, the film bug. So I have video footage of Mr. Hiawatha Douglas in the graveyard. I have footage of Tony Bounds. He comes out with us every time we go to the graveyard. And I'm going to do a documentary about the graveyard. So hopefully next year we'll have that documentary complete. Dr. Shine, Professor Shines, let me, yeah.
Have you all documented how many different families are in the graveyard?
We do have them categorized by family, so Jemiah has done that. Okay, so we do have the families. And Professor Shines is working with us. Her English 100 class is going to be researching the residents of the graveyard and providing us with the information so we can attach it to our map. So, English 100, you're going to be doing some research, okay, in the graveyard, just in case you didn't know it. And so we hope to learn more again about the community members, the people, the pillars of this community. We have, Ernest Berinsky out there. We have Dr. Bailey. There are so many wonderful people out there. So this is the digital archive I've already created. And once we scan those documents, Betty, they will go in this archive for scholars to use in research. We are also working on developing a digital studio. Ms. Springer in the library has given us a space. Mr. Sanders is working with me so that we can have alumni, when you come to campus during commencement, you can come up to the studio and record your recollections and your stories about Tougaloo College, and not just the Bodie Plantation, but things that happened when you were in school here. So we want to digitize those stories and archive them. This is what we've been doing with the Mississippi. That was a question about the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. They've met with me. This is the chief archaeologist. He has been here 2 times. We went out and we walked the campus. This is Dr. Freewald, and this is Mr. Matt Freeman, husband of Dr. Freeman. Okay, so we will be continuing once it gets cold enough, because I don't like snakes. So we have to wait until it gets cold enough for us to go back out there again. All right. Other collaborations, several faculty members. Forgive me, Dr. Savage, I left your E off there. We're also doing a project with Berea College in the Daniel Hand School. So I'm collaborating with them to develop curriculum, K through 12, with documents. So we're going to be scanning all of the Daniel Hand documents, putting them in the archive, and then building curriculum based on those documents. Okay? Professor Twiner couldn't be here. He's working with his choir. He came over earlier. Kimberly is in the back. We have so many big plans for drama. We'd like to do a graveyard tour. We have so many ideas that students can participate in. Again, research-based, okay, so that we, again, illuminate the lives of the enslaved that were here, okay? Of course, Professor Mayberry, who's been instrumental in helping me, guiding me, and of course, Tony Bounds. Education, Dr. Davis is ready to go, willing and ready to go, Dr. Chamberlain. So we've had many, many conversations with faculty all over the campus for projects that will be starting soon. We will be submitting a large-scale grant, hopefully next semester, to fund some of these types of activities. And also on the back of your flyer, if you are interested in the plantation project or working with the plantation project, scan that QR code, and there's a list of things you can check and say, I'm interested in this. One thing that I really want to get alums interested in is a historical society. Okay, so I see some people here who might be interested. Yes?
Dr. Schweiner, is he going back to look at the music of the period? What is his focus on?
Right, so we talked about a music festival that focuses on the spirituals, you know, and that connection to the slave past. I've also looked at, how many of you know what a Dr. Watt is, or a hymn, okay? So that information is just being lost, okay? Some would consider it folk music, okay? But it's really, really being lost, okay? Question, yes ma'am.
Yeah, my colleague here, Dr. Willis, was saying, are you a part of the Smithsonian, or you should try to get a grant from the Smithsonian to continue this?
Right, we have talked about that, Mellon. We're looking at different pots of money to fund different activities, but yes, we have definitely want to submit to the Smithsonian.
That would be great.
Yes, yes. Okay, yes, yes, ma'am.
I have a particular interest in healthcare and urban medicine research. Because I've done some things about the oral history of urban medicine. But was there anything in the documentation or in the real or in the writing about the healthcare of the slaves or of the others on the plantation? I'm assuming he had others.
Right, there was nothing in the will, but I did come across some information in the letters that the sisters wrote. Okay, there's just a little bit of information, but not much. Yes, yes, Betty. Right. Okay. 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 I'll get that information from you, Dr. Parker Smith. Yes, ma'am.
Was the AMA, was that you had on the picture?
Yes.
That's the American Medical?
Missionary.
Or American Missionary?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what were the sisters writing about?
Everyday things. Okay. You know, this happened and they went to this party, and sometimes they mention slaves, you know, so-and-so had a problem with this slave, and it was just really mostly mundane stuff, day-to-day stuff, but I did find some instances where they mentioned their John Williams Bodie, but it's mostly everyday stuff.
Did the sisters live on the plantation or here?
No, there is a brother in Vicksburg. Oh, okay. So the brother that he mentions, he actually was a senator, I think, or a congressman in Mississippi. So he was actually more famous than John, okay? And his line, I think the person that we saw came through his line, George Bodie, that line. But yeah, these sisters, some of them were in North Carolina. There were a lot of them. There were like 7 or 8 sisters. So I can't, tell you exactly who was where, but we do have that information. We have the whole family tree, okay, of who married who, and we can find out more about that, about the sisters, where the sisters were. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us more about what was the thinking for donating the land for a college or a school? I think it was 2 years school
donate? I'm sorry.
Oh, it was purchased?
Yeah, the land was purchased
Okay, but who purchased it and why were they?
through the AMA, and several schools were purchased during that same time.
Okay, and their thing was to educate slaves?
Educate newly freed slaves. That was the purpose, yes.
Okay, so I got it now. I didn't get the story.
Okay.
I got it.
Okay. Again, acknowledgments for those who have been helping me. And I thank you so much, and I will stay around for questions. So thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.